Now, I got to know about Evita, as probably most people have done, because many years ago I went to the show in London and I greatly enjoyed it. And then I forgot all about it. And it sort of, I suppose it sort of sat in the back of my memory for some years, because a few years ago I thought it would be great to put on this show again at a school in Essex. Now, I didn't actually know all that much about Evita other than what I had seen in the show. But it seemed to me to be an interesting story. A woman fighting for women's rights, fighting for the vote, and officially fighting for the rights of impoverished people in Argentina. Here is our poster. Here is the poster of our show. Evita, as you can see, nearly 10 years ago now. Now, Evita herself was a very interesting young lady. She was born into poverty. Not only was she born into poverty, but she also was illegitimate. So she had a pretty rough early life. Like so many young people, she had stars in her eyes, however, and she decided that she wanted to be famous. She wanted to be an actress. She wanted to be on radio or film or in the theatre. She had no theatre training. No training at all. So her chances seemed pretty slim. However, off she went to Buenos Aires. She took a bus to Buenos Aires and she tried to make her mark. Here is a very early picture of Evita, or Eva as she was then. In fact, she wasn't even Eva Peron at this stage. She was Eva Duarte. And Eva Duarte, at the age of 16, managed to get some small roles in radio. Not big roles, but gradually she worked her way up. She was, certainly in the photos that we see, she did seem to be quite a glamorous young lady. This was taken about 4 years later. There she is. There is a photo that she looks young, pretty, and she did start to get some roles. She did some modelling work. She appeared, as I said, on radio and actually did some theatre. Eventually, she also managed to get some very small film roles in Argentina. Now, I think it would be fair to say, if you saw these films, she wasn't a very good actress. She really wasn't a very good actress. She looked, but then it's not altogether surprising because, of course, she hadn't had any training. And then something happened that was to change her life forever. There was an earthquake. And the earthquake in Argentina resulted in many thousands of people dying. January 1944. Colonel Peron, Colonel Juan Domingo Peron, decided that he ought to have a big fundraising event to raise money for all the families who were destitute because of this terrible earthquake. He had, therefore, a big event to which he invited famous personalities, this big fundraising event. And they all met in an arena in Buenos Aires called the Luna Park. It's still there, you can still visit it today. It hosts pop concerts and other big celebrity events. Juan Peron attended this event. Who else should be at the event but a young actress known as Eva Duarte? They met, they hit it off, and they started an affair. In fact, Eva became Juan Peron's mistress and began living with him in Buenos Aires. Quite a perhaps shocking course of events for the more established members of society, not something perhaps one would do. They actually got married a year or so later. They married, they had a civil ceremony, and then they had a church ceremony. And who knew then what would happen? Well, Peron, who had already worked his way up, he was a colonel in the army, there had been a coup and he had gained a certain amount of power. Peron decided that he would run for president. And what do you know? He won. And he became president. And of course, Evita, or Eva as she was still called, Eva was to become the First Lady. 1946, Eva has climbed the ladder from destitute poverty, illegitimate birth. She has worked her way up through radio, into film, into theatre, and suddenly she has got her hands on the reins of power. She wasn't liked by the aristocracy. In fact, they hated her. She wasn't liked by the army, who felt that she had far too much influence. A young woman actually being able to influence politics. This was unheard of. But Juan Perón and Eva were very clever, perhaps. They knew the power of the ordinary working class people, the so-called shirtless ones, or in Spanish, the descamisados. Descamisados, a word that you will hear later on today. The shirtless ones, the poor. Eva and Perón made it their job to get the votes of the shirtless ones, the poor people. There was a big celebration, of course, when he becomes president. There he is, and there is Evita standing beside him, smiling, looking glamorous. That is that picture was taken on the balcony of the Casa Rosada, the presidential palace. It's still there. You can still see it. You can still see the balcony. Interestingly, the film, Evita, starring Madonna, the famous Don't Cry For Me Argentina, was filmed in the same place, on that balcony. There they are. There she is, waving to her people, waving to the mass crowds that are sitting and standing down below. And you can see there the Peron symbol, their political symbol. She became a great, powerful speaker, speaking on behalf of Peron whenever she possibly could. She was a powerful speaker, somebody you wanted to listen to, somebody who could excite the crowds. And Peron often left his wife to really stir the crowds up with sort of political excitement. She was also pretty glamorous. She rather liked being First Lady. She liked being somebody. She was the ultimate rags to riches story. She made it. She had the most fantastic dresses made for her by the most incredible designers. She also had the most wonderful jewellery collection. Jewels, 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 diamonds and rubies and sapphires. She loved her jewellery. In 1948, she was sent by Peron to travel around Europe to undergo what was known as the Rainbow Tour. She met leaders in various countries, including the Pope. She went to see the Pope, to be blessed by the Pope. She became a big, big star, and many people would say that she was at the time the most famous woman in the world. She travelled around the country to make sure she kept the support of the poor people. She travelled round in a train. There she is on the back of the train, and you can see there she is. She's handing things out. She's handing all sorts of things out to anybody who stopped by the train, gifts. Now, some people would say, well, they were bribes to get votes. Well, she gave out money. She handed out money. She handed out toys. she handed out food. Now, to the people, the aristocrats, they said this was disgusting, it was disgraceful, something that you shouldn't be doing. But Evita said, well, I'm helping the poor people who need my help. I know what they need because I was a poor person myself once. She also was a great defender of women's rights. She said, I'm a woman. I need to do something for women. And during her time in the presidential palace, she managed to support a new law that gave women the vote for the first time in Argentina. And if you look at that picture there, look at all those people, almost all women. She was a huge, huge attraction to the women of the country who up till then felt that they had been sidelined. She was a great letter writer because in 1948 she founded the Eva Peron Foundation, a charity that distributed all sorts of things to needy people. And she would personally write letters. I've actually got a number of her letters here. Some of her original letters. You're very welcome to come and have a look at them afterwards. She was a prolific letter writer. She loved also to meet people so that she could talk to them, hand out charity gifts. She was in control of her foundation. Every year, the foundation would give out 400,000 pairs of shoes, 500,000 sewing machines, 200,000 cooking pots. It's a vast number, vast number. And she also built schools, hospitals, homes for elderly people. But she still maintained complete control. People were very grateful. Look at these grateful children waiting for Eva's largesse. And then she became ill. She actually had cancer, although she didn't know it at the time. She wanted to run for vice president. She wanted Peron to be president and she wanted to be vice president. She gave a great speech from the Casa Rosada, but she clearly wasn't up to it. Peron himself decided that he didn't want her to run for vice president, and the military certainly didn't want her there. So she decided not to run. And at the end of her speech, this famous picture where she broke down in tears on her husband's shoulder. It's a famous picture, and you see that picture painted across Argentina. And here she is canvassing for support for Peron just after he is made president for the second time. They drove through Buenos Aires. But it's rather a sad picture as well. There she is, waving to the crowd with a half smile. The reason I find that picture so sad is when you know that in fact she was so ill at this stage that she was unable to stand, and she had a board put up inside, a wooden board stuck up inside her fur coat, which she was tied to keep her standing. She was very, very sick. On her 33rd birthday, she was made spiritual leader of the nation. An incredible accolade, although one that perhaps Peron was very influential in giving to her. And then on the 26th of July, she died. And Argentina went into mourning. Extraordinary scenes. If you look at YouTube on the television, you can see these extraordinary scenes of mourning. Huge crowds as the coffin was taken on a carriage through Buenos Aires. Huge crowds queuing to come and pay their last respects. Apparently, the flower shops for weeks were completely sold out of flowers. You couldn't buy flowers in Buenos Aires because they were all sold out everywhere. Piles and piles of flowers piled up outside the Casa Rosada and other important buildings in Buenos Aires. When I saw that picture, reminded me rather of another lady who died young, who was perhaps, during her lifetime, the most famous woman in the world. There is a picture that perhaps to compare it to. I wanted to find out more about Evita, so I went to Buenos Aires. And in fact, I took with me some of the young people who were going to appear in the show, so that they too could get a first-hand glimpse of Evita and her life. So, I'd like to show you just a few things that you can see today of Evita, because although Evita was born 100 years ago last year, it was the centenary of her birth in 2019, she was born in 1919, and although she died 70 odd years ago, she's still very much a presence in Buenos Aires. You can't escape her. You see her name everywhere, because for most people, poor people, underprivileged people, she is still their saviour. And I was staggered to see, often in a house you would see a picture of the Virgin Mary, a picture of Jesus, and next to it, a picture of Evita. For many people, she was a saint. Despite all the bad things she may have done, she was considered by many people a saint. And many people tried to get the Catholic Church to make her a saint. Didn't happen, of course. The first point of contact in Buenos Aires is the Evita Museum. Relatively new, and it is, interestingly, in one of the buildings used originally by the Eva Peron Foundation. You can see her hats. She loved fancy hats. You can see her dresses. She loved dresses. Spent an awful lot of money on dresses by top designers of the time. You can also see at the museum, you can see examples of the toys that the foundation gave out. I actually brought one of them with me today. There is a little doll from the Eva Peron Foundation given to a child in the 1940s. A child who probably had no toys normally. But there is an example of just a little doll. And you can see lots of toys there, metal toys, toy dolls, etc. I'm not quite sure what that particular thing is. That was also given out by the foundation. But as you can see, the interesting thing about that picture, you can see there is Evita and there is Peron on a stamp. It's given the sort of official stamp of approval, the official foundation gift. The second place, which I think is absolutely fascinating, I was blown away by this place, is the country home of Evita and Juan Peron. It's a 45-minute drive south of Buenos Aires, and it's quite a nice country house. And what was so extraordinary about it is when we went there, there was nobody else there. It seemed to be somewhere that very few people actually visited because it was well outside the city. So we were able to wander around the house at our own pace. There's her kitchen. Yeah, her kitchen. There's her bedroom. I'll let you into a little secret. When I went there, I had to be cheeky and go and lie on the bed just so I could just have a go on Evita's bed. There's her bathroom. I stood in the bathroom. I thought Evita was here. She'd have done her makeup and things in that mirror. There she was. I was almost within touching distance. Lots and lots of prizes and medals and medallions that she received during her life. Even the official train. Remember I showed you that picture of her giving out things off the back of the train? There is the train. And there is the back of the train where Evita stood as the train rumbled round the country. And then, of course, we have just a couple of neat, comfortable chairs. Evita and Juan Peron often sat there in those chairs, just probably enjoying the sun, because it's nice and sunny in Buenos Aires in Argentina. I was able to just sit there for a few minutes and just sort of take in the atmosphere. And what about Buenos Aires, the city itself? Well, of course, you can see the Luna Park. Remember when I said that is where Juan Peron and Eva Peron first met on that fateful day after the terrible earthquake, the fundraising event. And of course the Casa Rosada, the presidential palace, still very much a main tourist attraction, a feature of Buenos Aires. And of course, the famous balcony. Don't cry for me, Argentina, as Madonna sang, but where Evita herself delivered those inflammatory speeches. You can see there's the Casa Rosada, but you will see in this short video there's signs of Juan Peron around the place. You will see Evita, graffiti everywhere. Posters, Evita, Evita. JP, Juan Peron, pictures, posters, postcards. And here, look, Evita Santa, Saint Evita. And here is the political headquarters of the Peron political party. Evita Santa, Saint Evita. That's written today, if you like, in Buenos Aires. You can see what an impact she made on so many people who miss her. They wish that she was still with them because she was somebody who did something, who actually got up and did something for them. You can hardly miss this. This has actually been put up fairly recently on the side of this building. There she is. Picture of her on the whole side. This is massive. It's a massive building. And on the other side, there's another one. There she is, smiling away. And if you want to see it at night, looks really rather impressive as well, doesn't it? There she is, Evita, kept there for posterity. So right up in the sky, so you cannot avoid her. Even more extraordinary, perhaps, is this, that was built by Peron in 1947. This is Evita City, and it's a suburb of Buenos Aires. But what is so extraordinary about it, you can't see it unless you go up in the air and fly over the top of it. What is so extraordinary is it's shaped like the face or the head of Evita. Her profile is deliberately mapped out with her hair, nose, mouth, etc. Evita City, there it is. Quite extraordinary. And then, finally, her final resting place. This is her tomb. It is perhaps the most visited attraction in Buenos Aires. Usually there are great crowds of people here. I took our children to go and visit the Recoleta Cemetery, and particularly to find this one tomb. And I'm going to finish with a short little bit of footage of the young girl who played Evita in the show going to place some flowers on the tomb. Let's see if we can. Oh, that's one quote I thought I'd leave with you. She said many things that are very quotable, but perhaps this is most relevant. For somebody who was a star, for somebody who was perhaps a first modern celebrity, this is very interesting and it says a lot about her. Her biggest fear in life was being forgotten. But as you can see, I hope, from the pictures I've shown you, she isn't forgotten. And if anything, her fame is actually increasing. She is somebody who I don't think in Argentina particularly will ever be forgotten.
Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you. All through my wild days, my mad existence, I kept my promise. Don't keep your distance.